Is an American heat dome threatening to ruin the World Cup?
It's definitely super hot.
Just days after records were smashed in Europe, 120 million in the US now face extreme heat warnings over blistering temperatures.
We will need to start cancelling matches halfway through if they become too dangerous.
Experts say it could impact athletes and thousands of fans. So what exactly is the heat dome effect? Why are these heat waves happening more? And could this threaten the World Cup? Here's the breakdown. It's seriously hot in parts of the US. And I'm not just talking about usual summer heat. This is extreme.
We begin tonight here with this life-threatening heat wave now spreading across the U.S.
A massive heat wave is baking half the country.
This week is going to be very, very hot.
The kind where experts warn it could be life-threatening to be outside for too long.
It's going to be sweltering and dangerous for anybody who's spending a long period of time outside unprepared for the heat.
The US is one of the host nations for this year's 2026 FIFA World Cup. But millions of Americans are currently under a heat alert. Let's have a closer look. This is the weather forecast for US cities hosting World Cup matches. That's in Fahrenheit, the standard American measurement. But watch this convert to degrees Celsius. Those shades of orange and even red show the hottest places. And it could be worse when you convert it to the feels like temperatures. So why is this happening? Well, it's something called a heat dome. It's caused by intense high pressure. That's where air sinks to the ground, getting warmer as it does so. And that means no clouds and day after day of sunshine. Heat domes are very slow moving, so the extreme heat gets stuck, sometimes for weeks. The hot air is trapped like a lid on a pan. That's the science, but what does it mean in practice for tens of millions in the US? And what about the World Cup?
Right now, it's so hot. I'm getting dizzy.
There were plans in place before the tournament started, like hydration breaks. Not always popular.
Well, we will analyze what we will do in future tournaments, of course, based on this experience. And we see as well the intensity of the games. We've never seen 90 minutes in a tournament like this.
Games are being played later, not at the time when the worst heat is expected. Also, some matches are in stadiums with air conditioning, but there are warnings that even that won't be enough.
The final venue, MetLife Stadium, is not covered. And I was sat, as I said, in the crowd at the final last summer, and it was hot. It was really hot, and the sun is beating down on you.
We've seen these scenes play out in the UK and across Europe with records smashed. The hottest June ever, a temperature of 37.7 degrees in Norfolk. The tropical overnight heat has also affected people, staying around 20 degrees. In France, the national average temperature was also record-breaking. The south of the country saw a scorching 43.6 degrees. The French authorities say there have been over 1,000 deaths because of the heat wave. And temperature records have been broken in Germany, Poland and the Czech Republic over the last week. Climate experts say this could become the new normal. Hotter for longer, more extreme temperatures. For a World Cup that had a rocky start, and one that has gone on to give us incredible moments. There are now concerns that these rising temperatures could threaten to overshadow this tournament with the heat dome effect. We're seeing unprecedented temperatures across Europe, and this US heat wave is impacting the World Cup. But what about the next one? Spain, Portugal and Morocco plan to host it in June in 2030. The same month that we've just seen all these heat records smashed this year. And what about the Euro 2028 tournament? How will these rising temperatures shape the future of sport for athletes and fans? To help answer those questions, I'm going to bring in Marina Romanello. She's a climate change and health expert working at University College London. Marina, it's great to speak to you. How are you doing?
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm great, thank you.
Are you outside?
I am currently sitting outside at the pub at Exeter University because I'm attending the Exeter Climate Conference and I'm surrounded by very aggressive seagulls. So you will forgive me if they start yelling around me.
That's absolutely fine. We'll make sure they're involved as well. Let's talk about this recent heat wave in the US. What is the latest that you know about that?
Yeah, listen, we are seeing this kind of exceptional extremes of heat all around the world. We've experienced that here last week in the UK. It was brutal. During London Climate Action Week, we've seen record high temperatures, and now it's hitting the US as well with very high temperatures in the middle of what is kind of the World Cup, the male football World Cup, where we're expecting to see so many people outside and celebrating and in stadiums and in queues. So we're seeing these highs of heat and these extreme weather events hitting us more and more as a result of human-caused climate change. And I was just listening to someone here at the conference where I'm at saying this is the mildest weather we will experience moving forward. And
the mildest weather right now, you mean in the 20s?
We will experience moving forward. It will get more and more intense as time goes by, because we know that we're now committed to further global heating, to further climate change. So things will get even worse.
So we've got this World Cup going on at the moment, but we know that other competitions, we've got the Euros in 2028 in the UK, the World Cup next time is in Morocco, Spain and Portugal in 2030. Is the future going to make these type of events more challenging?
Certainly we're going to find more and more instances in which, if these events keep on happening, particularly in the summer months, we're going to see these extreme temperatures putting players and fans increasingly at risk. We had already a World Cup in Qatar, which was shifted to be in the winter locally in the Northern Hemisphere. And we're going to have to see a lot more of that happening. We have to get a lot more serious about what we can safely do when it comes to outdoor sporting activities and any public events. We also talk about kind of concerts. If Glastonbury had happened this year in the UK, it would have happened in the midst of a brutal heatwave. I've been to Glastonbury before. I would not have wanted to be there under those conditions. So any type of public events, especially those that happen outdoors, but any big mass mobilization of people, will need to rethink about that in the context of climate change and the associated risks to make sure that they can safely go forward.
Let's talk about what's happening in the US right now. When you see those graphs and when you see those forecasts of it goes orange, it goes red, it goes dark red, what does that mean? And what does that mean for the temperatures we're expecting?
So we have these weather forecasts that are really, really good. And these weather forecasts are now telling us what the temperature is throughout the day that we can expect. They're telling us what the actual temperature is expected to be. We're also getting very good at understanding better what the heat that we're going to be exposed to will be. And that is what sometimes get confused, but there's a difference between temperature and the heat that we're exposed to. Because it's not just about temperature. It's about sun exposure, so solar radiation. It's about wind speed, and it's about humidity. And these warnings that we're getting are looking at all of that information together and giving us alerts of how dangerous the conditions are going to come during the day and the upcoming days. And they're really useful information for us to protect ourselves, to change our behavior, to reduce the risk of adverse health impacts, what we call heat stress, heat-related illness, or what can lead to what is a potentially lethal heat stroke. That's a medical emergency that requires urgent and immediate attention, otherwise it leads to death. So those warnings are not just colorful graphs, they are potentially life-saving alerts that should affect and we should respond to by changing our behavior, by protecting us from the heat, and should affect also authorities in terms of changing certain events, certain behaviors, and protecting the population from what has become a pretty dangerous condition.
So if you have the temperature, is that likely to be lower than the heat we're seeing? So for example, if you have the temperature at say 32, could the heat be a lot worse? So 35, 36 maybe?
That's exactly right. And that's what you hear sometimes being referred to as the feel-like temperature. Sometimes it's higher than the actual, what the thermometer tells you. And that is what we need to pay attention to, because that is the parameter that will tell you, well, is your body at risk? And that's what gives us the alert.
That feels like then what level can it get to where the human body is saying, no, that's enough, this is too much?
Yeah, well, there's different estimates about what the lethal level of heat is, and obviously every individual is different. But there's some very clear, very kind of well-described thresholds where we know that we need to start changing our behaviors. So when this wet bulb globe temperature, that is called technically this feel-like temperature, goes about 26 degrees Celsius, we already know that we need to take more breaks, that we cannot be doing such intense physical activity, that we need to start protecting ourselves. And when it goes about 28, 30, and beyond 30, then that is a dangerous level of heat where you need to start considering not playing the sport, protecting yourself from the heat, changing your behavior. Above 32 degrees, that gets actually dangerous, and there's a high risk of heat stress and heat stroke when we get to that level.
Let's delve into those conditions then. You talked about heat stroke. This always confuses me actually, because you can get, I think it's heat exhaustion and then heat stroke. Which way round is it, and how much more dangerous is it?
Heat exhaustion comes first, then it can lead to heat stroke, and heat stroke is when your body cannot longer cool itself. When you've gone beyond that capacity of your body to cool down, and your core temperature, your internal temperature starts exceeding, generally it's kind of that 40-degree threshold where you start experiencing confusion, seizures, you might faint, you might collapse, and if you're not cooled down really rapidly, that can lead to death.
You will die.
That's it, yeah. But essentially, yes, if it's not treated, that's an absolute medical emergency. So that's why it's so important to be aware of the early signs of heat stress, heat exhaustion, and heat stroke. That's why it's so important to have a prepared health systems, prepared staff to identify those situations and to ensure that we're really ready to respond. But above everything, ensure that we don't have to respond to that level, that we can protect ourselves way before the heat stroke hits, at the point where we can reduce the risk of heat stress by undertaking very sensible measures and protecting ourselves from the heat, because we know it's here, we have the alerts, as you just mentioned.
We've seen that FIFA have got some things in place for the World Cup already. So we've seen those hydration breaks where players have been taking on water or other hydration as well. And we've also seen some stadiums in the US have air conditioning, for example. What other measures do you think need to be in place for not just players, but for the fans who are going to all of these big events? What needs to be in place?
Yeah, listen, you just said it right. We have some measures around the players when they need to take breaks. There's in tennis as well, we have some new regulations that will tell you, well, they can have a break if it goes above certain threshold in most matches. And air conditioning really helps indoors when they're playing what is a really physically intense activity, which heats the body from inside. So it's not just the outside heat, it's the body that you're generating and that you cannot release because it's so hot outside. So the measures around play are really important. And getting players physiologically adapted to heat is really important when they come to play in a hot country, and most coaches will do that. Most coaches will be aware of the fact that they need to be acclimatized to the place that they will be playing. But we pay much less attention to what happens to the fans, because oftentimes the fans are in big stadiums, perhaps in a seat that is exposed to the sun. If there's air conditioning in the stadium, they might be enjoying the air conditioning indoors. But oftentimes what happens is that they have to queue outside before they get into the stadium, often in the sun, often with not enough access to cooling or shading. And even those fans that are not at the stadium, those fans that go to the pub, those fans that move around in public transport to get to see the match or to go to see the match in person, fans that are drinking alcohol, which also increases the risk of heat stress because it dehydrates us effectively. So the whole ecosystem around a huge event is at risk, and individuals inside and outside of the playing pitch are at risk. So there's tons of measures that can be put in place. The first one is very clear alerts and taking this very seriously. We will need to start cancelling matches halfway through if they become too dangerous, but that doesn't help the spectators and the fans that are already in the stadium and that are already being exposed. So we need to do this with much better planning, and we need to put in place measures like adequate shading everywhere, adequate cooling places that fans can go to even when they're outside of the stadium. And above everything, we need to start adapting our behavior and our cities. We need to start providing much more green spaces. Green spaces and trees are incredibly efficient at reducing the temperature in urban spaces, much more than artificial shading. And they're great for climate change, they're great for mental health, so we need to plant trees everywhere. We need to ensure that we have access to cooling and that we have access to hydration, and that we're telling people don't go out very clearly when temperatures have become dangerous, because sometimes there's nothing that you can do. If you're walking down the street, there's a huge bus throwing heat at you, or a lot of air conditioning units around you in a city that increase the urban heat, what we call the urban heat island effect. That's very difficult to get away from if you're moving from one place to the next. So sometimes it's about staying at home or going to a cool place and staying there if conditions have become dangerous.
You're an expert in this field. You're so passionate about it. Are we doing enough?
In one word? No, not nearly enough. But we're not doing nearly enough. And we know what we should be doing. We know how to do more, better, and faster.
So how frustrating is that?
It's incredibly frustrating, because you know what happens is the same as with every predicted emergency. You know what you should be doing to avoid those deaths. And then when the death hits, that is when we start thinking, oh, we should have planted more trees, so we better, so it doesn't happen again. But that's irreversible. So we need to start being much faster and much more serious at responding to the science that we have. We have outstanding science that tells us exactly what we should be doing to increase our adaptation. We know that, for example, air conditioning is really useful to cool indoor spaces, but we know that it's not the right choice, or it shouldn't be the first choice, because we have much better sustainable solutions, like, for example, window shutters, like passive cooling measures, like green spaces, which I already mentioned, like increasing airflow in buildings that will reduce the need for air conditioning, and that would also allow us to adapt to the heat. What happens oftentimes when we are dependent on air conditioning is two things. One, we're not prepared for hot weather because we're expecting to be indoors, so we don't dress appropriately, we don't acclimatize to hot weather if we're spending most of our day in a very cool environment, and when we go out, it's so much worse. And the second thing that happens is that where does the heat that the air conditioning unit takes from inside go? It goes to the outside. It goes to the street. It goes to the city. So those people that are not inside the air-conditioned environment are exposed to so much higher temperatures as a result of those using it. So it generates huge inequalities and huge risks in the outdoor environment when we depend so much on air conditioning. So it should be used, but only when necessary, and we should be much better at sustainable cooling solutions, fans, as I said, window shutters, etc.
In the US, they're seeing these really high temperatures. Potentially, looking at the forecast as well, we could be seeing these temperatures again next week. Is there something particular going on with this year? The geography nerd in me has to ask about El Nino. Is that potentially why we're seeing it a little bit worse this year?
Potentially, yes. That's very, very likely that El Nino is playing about with our weather already. And we're already seeing kind of those effects in these very extreme temperatures. There's also climate change, and that is the main driver, which El Nino acts on top of, right? But you have that base increase in heat exposure events that comes from human-caused climate change, from our burning of fossil fuels, from our emission activities. And to give you a sense of what that looks like, with the Lancet Countdown, that is the group that I lead, we've done a study that we published last year. And we found that on average, every person around the world on average is today exposed to about 19 days of heat waves per year. Yeah? And that 84% of those days of heat wave exposure per person wouldn't have occurred if it were not for anthropogenic climate change. So we're almost exclusively exposed to heat wave because of climate change, the climate change that we've caused of this level of heat. So we're now, as I said at the beginning, in a situation in which further heating is now committed. We will see further temperature increase. And that means that these heat events will become more intense, more frequent, and more dangerous. So we need to start being very, very serious about how we're going to adapt, because as I said before, this is the mildest climate that we will continue to experience in our lifetimes. So we can expect it to become so much more, and adaptation is fundamentally important.
And Marina, just one of the final points that I wanted to get to you on is that adaptation. Are we going to have to get used to, say, not going out in the middle of the day, cancelling events, adapting our buildings, spending loads of money to do so? Is this now the new normal?
Look, that can become a reality, for sure. Many people in Italy are already choosing to stay indoors during the current heat wave, and I have family members there that have decided not to go out during the days of heat wave because they just cannot cope with the heat. So that will spontaneously become something that we might start doing more and more.
Should we have maximum temperatures?
We should have maximum temperatures for given things. So, for example, for workers that are in very physically active sectors of employment, or that wear a lot of PPE that makes them cool down less efficiently.
That's the personal protective equipment, isn't it?
The personal protective equipment, that's it. So the protective clothing that they need to wear, which sometimes is really, really heavy. Definitely we need much more serious thresholds for those workers. We need thresholds for children in schools, because we know that our school infrastructure here in the UK is not very well prepared to cope with the heat. We need those thresholds to protect people for sure, and we don't yet have them. And as you were saying before, we need to start retrofitting our buildings. We will need to start using more air conditioning, and that will become at a huge expense. But one thing that is important to remember is that as we continue to emit greenhouse gases and burn fossil fuels, it will get worse. And each unit of greenhouse gas that we emit will make the cost of adaptation higher. We make the risks to our health, and we'll make the unavoidable impacts a lot more severe. So we need to adapt, but we also need to urgently reduce greenhouse gas emissions to make adaptation possible and effective.
Are you hopeful we can do that?
I know we can do it. I'm not sure we will choose to do it, but I know we can do it.
That was a diplomatic answer, but I liked it. Marina, great to speak to you. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's The Breakdown. Thanks for watching. See you next time.